Hello, welcome to the Scroll interviews with the authors and translators of the 5 novels shortlisted for the 2023 JCB Prize for Literature. We're talking to Vikramajit Ram, author of Mansur.
Very good to see you, Vikramajit. Congratulations on making the shortlist. How do you feel?
Very good and very honored and very grateful.
Okay, so this is going to be an interview more about your craft than about the actual books, because I've had the good fortune of asking you to my heart's content about the book. What is to you good writing? Are there elements about a novel, a work of fiction, that make it stand out to you, that you aspire to in your own writing?
I think when you have the germ of an idea for a story, you want to try and give it your very best shot. You might have a starting, you might have a finishing point. And it's really your business to make those two ends meet. And meet in a manner that holds the attention of a reader, probably gets a reader to investigate certain parts of the storyline deeper, if it's that sort of a novel. And also the kind of novel you would like to actually read. Yeah, for example, what I've just done with Mansur. It really started off as a quest to try and find out more about the life of one particular painter, and that in turn led me down several paths. So I guess it is about trying to tell a story to the best possible with your strengths at that particular point of time in your life, because obviously this doesn't happen in one shot. There's a progression to one's writing career, I guess. We sort of learn along the process.
Are there authors you admire, authors who succeed at these things that you're especially interested in, authors whose work you look up to or try to emulate in your own writing?
Absolutely. Hilary Mantel, for one. Because there's that famous line which has been quoted so often now that it's become a bit of a cliche. Beneath every history, another history. That's in Wolf Hall.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's what writing historical fiction is really all about, I feel. Because what is actually presented to you as history is just through one particular point of view, or from one particular set of writers. But if you look beyond that, then you start seeing or visualizing other layers and levels of life, because ultimately that's what it's all about. It's about people who are living, or who have lived rather, and about the things that they did. So definitely the late Miss Mantel. I think all of us who are writing historical fiction sort of look up to her and her work. A huge body of work, and it's also a very, very disparate body of work. It isn't only historical fiction. Mary Renault, who is another fabulous writer, particularly her Alexander trilogy, which looks at the life of Alexander, and in the trilogy, the Persian boy. Whom else can I think of? More contemporary writers, but actually too many to actually list. And,
Are you reading something right now that you're enjoying? Something that you would recommend to people?
Oh yes, I am reading quite a lot of very different kind of books. And some of it is fiction. But what's happening is that this has actually been a very busy year. It's been an incredibly busy year with Mansur. And each time I sit down to, say, give myself some time to actually enjoy the entire thing of reading, there's something or the other which sort of pulls you away from the story. And then getting back into that groove of reading, or getting back into that, that pleasurable activity of reading and regularly, is tending to become a little difficult right now. And I think it's also because there are other things happening with Mansur. I've been doing a series of illustrated talks. I don't know whether you know about it. primarily on the miniatures. It's not really about the book at all, because the novel is all there, but it's about all the material, which led to the creation of this little thingy. And there's so much I've collected in terms of just the miniatures from the late 1500s all the way to the mid 1600s, and it's lovely presenting this material afresh and getting a whole lot of people, different audiences, to look at it again. And that takes a lot of hard work, because you can't do this same old thing for every audience. So the title of it is different. Each of the illustrated talks that last for about 45 minutes. The most recent was about an hour. And for a lot of people, the material itself is very new, because they haven't really looked at it, in such level of detail. And so that is a very pleasurable exercise. So with all of that, I don't really get so much time to actually read. Yeah.
Well, all the love and work that you've put into Mansur has really paid off then. It is a very beautiful book. I want to ask you a little bit about your writing routine now. Is there a time of the day when you think you write best? Is there a step-by-step process that really gets you into a headspace? Do you have a defined routine for how you get your writing done?
When I'm actually writing, yes. I wake up very early in the morning. I'm one of those weirdos who wakes up at 4 o'clock. Yeah, and then it just becomes a habit. And I found that's very helpful to write, even if it's just scribbling away and it's utter gibberish and you can't really read what you've written. And I work by hand. So the first initial part of any writing process always. And it helps to, even if you put in about an hour and a half or 2 hours, first thing in the morning, you then get on with all the mundane routines of the rest of the day. And at least you've got it down there on paper. You can always get back to it. Never mind if you can't read what you've written, because that brings in a different kind of energy into play. So yes, there is an actual very strict discipline to the writing, because it's hard work like any other hard work. Yeah, and we all know that there's this strange idea that writers are just sitting over there with their fingertips and the book just happens. Obviously, it doesn't happen. It can be very frustrating at times. It can be very difficult at times. You question yourself a lot of the time, and sometimes you wonder, why am I even doing this? Yeah, but I remember something that somebody told me long ago. So if you have decided that you want to write, whatever it is, fiction, non-fiction, any form of writing, once you've got started on something, stick with it, see it to completion. Do not abandon any piece of writing. And I think that is actually very sage and very, very valuable advice to somebody who's just starting off. And I was told this sometime when I was in my 20s. I used to work as a graphic. I trained and worked as a graphic designer. And then I said, I need to, if I really want to do something else, I need to do it then. So that was 2006 when I actually started, being a full-time writer. It was very scary, I can assure you. Coming back to what we were talking, I'm sorry I wander all over the place. So you have to have a very strict routine, and it becomes your time. You can't have phone calls, and you can't have, not that anyone's calling you at 4 o'clock in the morning, but it can happen. You just need to carve out that time and space for yourself. And you also have to keep yourself physically active. It's incredibly important. So while I was writing Mansur, and even before that actually with the previous books, I had a lovely routine of swimming every morning. Yeah? And I finished my 40 lengths or whatever it was, and sit by the side of this pool at a particular place which is very quiet and surrounded by greenery, and we have lots of birds and things like that. Sounds terribly idyllic, I know, but it's not like just opening out a laptop, because what I'm doing then is working with the material scribbled by hand earlier in the day. So, since you've asked me about the process, I'm just giving this one as an example. It will, by about 12:30 or 1 p.m., your brain starts sort of, just can't think anymore. So that's when you say, okay, I'm done for the day. Yeah, and you always leave it at, you sort of trail off in the day's work at a point where sort of almost mid-sentence sometimes. Yeah, maybe there's some little weird quirk, so that you've left it like ... So at some point in the rest of the day when you're doing other things, something sort of filters in. So you can pick up where you left off the following morning. Yeah, but of course it doesn't always happen so smoothly because there'll be a whole lot of other things going on in your life. And a lot of people will not be very patient with you if you say that I've got a chapter which I've left incomplete, so I need to get back to there are other things also. That is fiction, this is reality. So I think we've all been through that. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you one frivolous question that I'm just personally
more
interested
frivolous
in.
the better, please. Please
before we get to
frivolous.
something important.
Yeah.
Do you listen to music when you're writing?
No.
No?
No.
Not even instrumental music?
No.
Why is that? I think that's uncommon.
Well, that's probably because I'm listening to a lot of other music the rest of the time. Yeah. And it's mostly classical music, both Indian and Western.
Okay. Now I'll ask you a more important
That
question.
was hardly a frivolous question.
I'll ask you a more important question that I thought I'd build up to later in the interview, but I'll pick up on something you said. Something about once you've made up your mind to write, once you are in the process of writing something, to see it to completion. And that writing came to you, it's not something that you started off with, but that you sort of switched careers to while you were doing other things. Why did you decide to write?
Actually, I was always writing. From the time I was very young, actually.
I was going to ask you another frivolous question on that. What's the first thing you wrote? When did you write something and thought, I'd like to see this published, or I'd like somebody to read it? Even if it didn't happen, what's your first memory of writing something and knowing, oh, this is something I want to do more of?
It's hardly a frivolous question to begin with. I was a very avid letter writer, and some of the recipients of those letters actually saved those letters. Yeah? So I have a collection of these really strange letters I've written to very close members of the family who lived in other parts of the world or the country. That I later discovered that they saved all of those. But I do have very vivid memories of writing those letters. I was very young. So that is my earliest memory of writing. And I used to write to friends who used to be in boarding school and then they'd write back, those lovely blue inland letter things saying that we're permitted only one letter a week or something like that, or one letter a month. And we have to write to our parents, so we're very sorry, we can't keep responding to all of your... I shudder to think if people have still got any of those. Yeah, I wonder what they contained. Anyway, so they were always stories. I was a very weird child. That... Yeah, but I think it was quite horrid because I know I was precocious and I noticed everything. These yours which were flapping away, so people had to be very careful. That had this way, and I never got caught. So yes, I heard a lot, and I didn't see very much. I heard a lot, and I came to my own conclusions, and those used to go into weird stories. And all that is a little embarrassing. So we can skip forward to, I trained as a designer. And I worked as a designer for a long time. And it helped that when I was at NID in 1980s, we did have to write. We had to, create design briefs. Even if they were completely hypothetical, we needed to know how to articulate things. in writing, very specifically for a career in design. And I think that helped a hell of a lot because our final diploma project was completely, had to be articulated, our project. And we also had something called a colloquium paper, which helped clarify a lot of doubts in our mind, to analyze things, and then to express them. And we were only about 22, 23 at that point of time. Another important thing was that we were taught how to research. And obviously, I'm talking about a period when we didn't have access to Wikipedia to begin with. So a lot of work was done in the library. So you needed to know how to do that kind of research. And I think, I definitely think that my training as a designer has contributed in a huge, huge way to what I now do, which is right. Because in a way, I still am designing. It's not like I quit being a graphic designer. Your thought processes take a particular form. There is, exactly like you have a design process, you have a writing process. Yeah, you could start off with a tiny little germ of an idea, and then you develop it. And how do you develop it? And you need other sources. So how do you research all of that? And how do you organize your thoughts more than anything else? All of us have our own different ways of organizing things. It could be little post-its or large charts or index cards. I find it very helpful to work with index cards because then you can juggle things around and you can just sort of rip them apart and develop on one particular. So yeah, in terms of process, I suppose, that's how it works.
Let's talk a little bit about the next stage of the writing, the editing process, revisions.
Love it.
When you're going through the process of it all, is there something that publishers especially sort of give you grief over? That's something they want to be changed or added? How romance novels need happy endings, something like that. If so, and how do you handle that kind of feedback? How do you make a call on this is something I want to incorporate versus this is something that actually reads my character strong or doesn't quite sit well with me in terms of how I envision the story? So do you have sort of trusted feedback givers outside of the publishing ecosystem, and how do you pick and choose advice on what to take, what to discard?
Okay. 5 books to date. Fiction as well as non-fiction. 3 non-fiction and 2 fiction. I must say with all 5 of them, I have been inordinately fortunate with the editors I've worked with. Yeah. One of them, we worked on 2 different books with 2 different publishers, one fiction and one non-fiction. And every one of those experiences has been brilliant. I have learned a hell of a lot. There's been a wonderful exchange of ideas. And I've always been very open to criticism. Again, I go back to my NID days as a student, and then as a graphic designer, as a practicing graphic designer. You have to be open to criticism, even if it seems unfair or unjustified at that point. And not to become too precious about your work, to just be open to opinions. Because at the same time, we're given the freedom to either change things completely or actually follow your instinct and not do anything about it. When it comes to editing, I personally find that actually the most enjoyable and the most fulfilling part of the writing process. Primarily because you've been working on a manuscript for years on end, all by yourself, especially when it comes to something like fiction. You don't want to talk about it too much because some of the energy goes. It's different with non-fiction because you might need to source some material and you need to talk to somebody about something, either as a historian, you need to consult somebody about something. With fiction, you're working pretty much on your own and with the characters and the people, your people in the book. And you don't want to share their stories with everybody. So it is a long process, of course, and finally you have somebody who receives that material and is looking at it only to to read it impartially with no personal agendas to it, just to look at it and give you the kind of professional feedback and criticism. Of course, you also, in my case, yes, I have one very trusted reader who will look at it not because this person happens to be a very, very close friend, almost a family member, but because they're looking at it for the material itself and giving you very, very impartial, uncolored feedback. Then when it goes to a professional pair of hands and professional eyes, they're coming at it from a different place altogether. And I think I've said this before somewhere. A similar question was asked to me somewhere. You value whatever opinion you get. You might not like it or you might like it, but that's not the issue. You just want to see what the other person has to say. And I must say, the 4 editors I've worked with on 5 different books, including the most recent, have been fabulous. I have grown so much in the process. And then you incorporate that. You don't have to accept everything. And in my case, I haven't had to change very much or, reconstruct or restructure something. The tiny little things. And the lovely part is that because we're so close to the material always, you get blinkered a little bit. All it takes is one little question mark in the margin notes. And then you look at it and then say, oops, okay. And then you try and address it. And it actually does improve the quality of the finished work. And there's another thing, I don't know whether, I've always believed that less is more. Yeah. Sometimes it might not seem obvious because I know I talk too much. When you whittle things down, bring them to their most essential, basic form, I think things communicate much better. That's just my personal approach to the writing, and it's taken time to get there. I think back about large, clunky sentences and large, heavy, ponderous paragraphs. And suddenly you come to this clean, crisp line. It's a very joyful feeling. And you can only hope that somebody, reads more into it, creates a little image.
I know for Mansur how the process started for you, that you read about him and you were interested in his life and then you crafted the story. But ordinarily, what gets you thinking? Are you somebody who's attracted to a plot first or a character? What comes to you, especially when you're thinking of fiction, because it's only a concern then. But is it a story or a plot, an event that attracts you first, or something remarkable about a person that you want to mold into a character then?
I think it starts with the people for me. I don't even see them as characters, but I actually see them as people. It's funny you should ask me this. On the flight, within about 40 minutes of the flight from Bangalore today, suddenly the flight attendants asked, is there a doctor in the thing? And something had happened in row 1. Yes, it was, I have a feeling it was a heart attack. And it was interesting because nobody stood up, nobody jumped up, nobody peered over. I mean, we've all become very sort of well-mannered on flights, I must say. And of course, there was a young lady who went forward. And this was in row 1, so they actually brought out the oxygen cylinder. And I think whatever was happening. It was very reassuring to find that it was an ambulance and not a hearse on the tarmac when we landed. But while all this was going on, I was actually sort of thinking about that as it's perfect material for something. So the ideas for fiction can come from anywhere.
And how emotionally attached are you to your characters? I suppose when you're working with a story, of course, a work of fiction, you have to really get into their heads to understand how they would behave in a room, how they would act given the circumstances that they find themselves in, which would mean living with them for months, perhaps years, depending
Yes.
on how long you're working with them. And then one day you just have to let them go, let them make the people they will make of themselves in the minds of the readers who will read them. Is that process of getting into the head of people, making friends with them, making a home in their minds in a way, is that an energizing process? Is it an exhausting process, thinking through things with them?
Not exhausting at all. Not exhausting at all, because you're living with them. But at the same time, you're living with them, but you don't get so obsessed with them that, that you start hallucinating and start seeing them at your dining table or elsewhere. No, you don't. You've created them. You're deeply interested in them and then probably invested in them. And you want to see where they're going to go. Even in the past, there's another work of historical fiction, which you probably have, I don't know if you've read it, The Sun and Two Seas. And that was a huge cast of characters again. And it's lovely to work with lots of people. Yeah. And because you have to sort of see them as living people. So you can actually visualize them. Especially when there are animals involved. And Sun and Two Seas has animals involved. As does this one, Mansur. What was the question? Sorry. Do I get exhausted? No, not at all. No,
How
not at all.
emotionally attached are you to your characters?
I'm very emotionally attached to them.
And is that exhausting, that attachment? Because you
not at all.
eventually have to let them go.
You have to let them go, but then that's how we are with even all our relationships with, non-fictional, real people, family, friends. Yeah, some people can be tiresome, but they don't get exhausting. They can be annoying. It's the same with fictional characters. They can be hugely irritating, but you are still interested in them. Yeah, which is why you have anything to do with them at all in the first place. Otherwise, you wouldn't have put them in the book. You'd just cast them aside. By the way, that does happen. You might have other characters whom you sort of conceived of at some point of time, but then you say you don't need them really. They don't play any significant role in this particular story. And don't we do that also with our interpersonal relationships? We have one group of friends, and then there's an outer group of friends, and not just friends, family also. You don't have to, everybody doesn't have to be invited to the party. Some of them we keep out. We do that all the time. Same with people in books. But they don't get me exhausted at all.
Well, we'll not take you to court for it. My last question for you is, is there writing advice that you've been given that you really stick with, especially that now that you have 5 books behind you? I'm certain you've learned things in the process by yourself and, depending on what others have told you, your editors and your friends. So is there any particular writing advice that you stick with that you found indispensable?
Writing advice from other people, well, definitely the one about if you've started something, see it through to completion. It might not get published. You might not want it published. You might not even know if it's got a readership. But if you started on something, try and finish it, because it's good even as a writing exercise. And to keep writing constantly, because it's very easy to lose the flow of things. There's a different kind of energy to it. Personally, I've also found that writing by hand first is much better. It sort of clarifies your thoughts a lot more. Of course, your sentences will be longer. You'll ramble on and on. It's a bit like when we speak, right? Not sticking to crisp, clean sort of. You're going all over the place, and you can do the same when you're scribbling and writing freehand, because there's a very weird connection I feel between, I don't know, probably complete thing, but there is something to it. That energy of it it frees you up, and it's actually quite lovely. And then when you work with that same material, of course, sometimes you like, oh my God, what the hell is this? But write by hand to start off with. I don't keep track of, draft 1, draft 2, draft 3. It just happens. And then you reach a stage where you know that this is it. Anymore, if you handle it anymore, it's a little bit like pastry dough, right? I mean, if you handle it too much, it's going to end up with one sort of sodden lump. You want air, you want light in it. So, remain hopeful and cheerful, and stay physically active. It's very important. Yeah.
Well, that's very good advice. I think we'll wrap up here. Thank you so much for your time, and good luck with Mansur on the shortlist.
Thank
See you in November.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. This interview is part of the series of interviews with the authors and translators of the 5 novels shortlisted for the 2023 JCB Prize for Literature.